Hey everybody, welcome back to Beyond the Saga. Dave Cottingham here with Hannah Burr as always. How are you, Hannah?
I'm doing well, and how are you?
Fantastic. Welcome back to Beyond the Saga, where we dive into all those stories beyond the Skywalker saga. And on this episode, this Patreon exclusive episode, this is only for you patrons of Inside the Force, we are diving into Star Wars Phasma by Delilah S. Dawson. It's the adult novel that came out before, they did these publication series where they're doing journeys to, and this is during the journey to The Last Jedi. So this is after The Force Awakens when we get our first glimpse of Phasma. And this is the backstory of basically how she became the chromed stormtrooper that we see in the sequel movies. Like I said, Delilah S. Dawson wrote this thing. Came out back in September of 2017. So again, a couple of months before The Last Jedi came out. And I think it fills in, obviously, a big gap, a big mystery of who this person was. So I don't think there's anything else backstory-wise, but that's where, as far as timeline goes, it kind of jumps back and forth. Its current timeline, which is it's before Episode 7, right? I think that's right? Yes.
Yes.
The present time is before Episode 7, and then, of course, it jumps back a lot to the past where we find the story of Phasma. So, as always, Hannah, your overall impression of Phasma.
So I think it's a great look into where Phasma came from, what she had to go through to get where she is today. Well, today. So it was great to learn a lot about her. But we learn a lot about her through Vi. I'm going to massacre her last name.
Maradi.
Vi Maradi, who is a part of the Resistance. And she is captured and is interrogated by another stormtrooper wearing a uniform of one color, very much like Phasma, except his color is red. So, Cardinal.
Which is on the back.
Yes.
Which is pretty cool. The back cover.
So
yeah. The back cover is the red stormtrooper, which is Cardinal. Yep.
Cardinal. So Cardinal's interrogating Vi. He's trying to get some dirt on Phasma. And Vi tells the story based on people she has spoken to, things that she's researched. And that's how we find out about Phasma. For me, it's not that the book was difficult to at first get into. It was more or less of, why is this relevant? Because we start off with Vi in space, and then she gets captured by the First Order. And so it's it's intriguing, don't get me wrong, and it definitely pulls you in, but at the same time, you're like, I thought this was about Phasma.
Yes, right.
When is Phasma going to come into this? Does Phasma capture her? No? Okay. And then here's Cardinal. But as soon as we got to Vi talking about Phasma, I could not put the book down. It was so incredibly good, and it was so fascinating to see how Phasma's mind worked. We also got introduced to Brendel Hux.
Brendel, yep.
We got to see a lot of him and his interaction with Phasma and how that influenced her choices in life. And we'll leave it at that because there are a lot of spoilers that can result from that.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was a fantastic read. What's your overall impression of it?
Yeah, I listened to this book when it came out. So I actually, it's been 5 years now since I listened. God, almost 5 years. Wow. Since I listened to it leading up to The Last Jedi. And, for those people back then that, listened to it or read it, you did have a much more understanding of her as you went into the movies. Now, it's one of them things where how relevant is it to know her backstory? You know, I think it's arguable either way. Like, if you know it and you're watching the movies, does it, you know, we'll get into the whole relevancy, you know, as we do with these stories to the saga. But, you know, I felt it was better. I felt the best parts about this book really were the other things, also beyond her, which, like you said, was Brendel, because there's a lot of, now Brendel Hux, for those of you who don't know, this is not the General Hux that's in the movies. This is his father.
This isn't, I think it's Percy Weasley. This isn't the Weasley brother.
Correct. Yeah. Armitage is his name. Armitage Hux is the General Hux that we see in the movies. Brendel Hux is the father, and you also learn a little bit about the beginnings of the Stormtroopers, right? The First Order Stormtroopers. So those things were pretty interesting. Now, the Vi Moradi stuff is interesting only because at the time, you were introduced. I believe you were first introduced to Vi Moradi in this book, but then ultimately, you should know who Vi Moradi is now because she had her own book come out called Black Spire, and then of course she walks around Galaxy's Edge at Disney, which is pretty cool. My daughter loves Vi Moradi. So the relevancy of her when I first read this or listened to this, it didn't hit me like you said. It really didn't. Okay, I don't know who she is, and you know, she's not really important to me. What's more important is the story she's telling. And when we finally dive in there and we get to this planet called Parnosis, which is out in the unknown regions, and the whole storyline of how Brendel Hux gets there and how she becomes part of, you know, the First Order. I mean, it is pretty fascinating. There's a lot that goes on in the middle of this book, not just their journey, but, you know, I mean, it's a journey. It truly is a journey through this planet. And I thought that was pretty, now, and I thought that the ending, you know, the twist was pretty awesome. If you know what I'm talking about.
I know exactly what you're talking about. And
yeah.
I love it as well.
Yeah. So, I really like this book. I mean, there's parts of it, you know, kind of like you said, the beginning, because it's a little slow. And there's parts of it towards the end that gets a little slow, but it's like, but man, the chunk of this thing was pretty interesting, you know, pretty interesting. So I guess the question though is how much how relevant is it for you to know her backstory for the movies?
I mean, personally for me with Phasma, when I first saw her in The Force Awakens, I was like, oh, a female stone trooper with chrome. So, okay, I guess she's special.
Yes.
And that's all. That's literally all I thought. So for me, it was beneficial because I was like, okay, I actually know more about her. I'm a little more angry about her death than I was before. Yes. Sorry, just am. It's this character we're introduced to that seems like she is such a significant character and we know very little about her. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was a slight injustice to her, especially now after reading the book. It's like you had all of this information. Why couldn't any of that have been at least slightly hinted at?
Yeah.
In the movie. So, but I mean, I know there's going to, it boils down to the question of should the books and comics help put together pieces that the movies leave out? Yeah, it's that all-time question. But I think if you don't care about Phasma, or if you just kind of write her off as another character, you're not going to see it as relevant. But if you're like, well, hang on, why is she so important? then it is relevant. So I think you were right in the beginning in saying you can argue either way.
Yeah. Well, I think what, taking a step back and looking at the sequel trilogy, well, unfortunately, she's only in the first two movies, Force Awakens and The Last Jedi. But looking back at it, taking a step back and looking at it now, she kind of parallels Boba Fett in the original trilogy, where you only get these couple scenes with her. But the problem is, and what I mean by that, the mystery of her backstory, you don't really know this person behind the mask. But the problem is, unlike Boba Fett, I feel like Boba Fett had this profession of being a bounty hunter. And he had this aura. You almost, looking at Boba Fett, you're almost like, oh, he's a badass. Like he and he comes across that way in Empire. Then ultimately, we see him perform in Return, but ultimately he gets bested by Han just accidentally. But with Phasma, in The Force Awakens, when we got introduced to her, she's really just walking around, not doing much.
She's a throwaway character, I felt
like. A complete throwaway character. I think they missed the mark there to give her some relevance, to make us say, oh, she's a badass. Like, you don't really walk out of it thinking that, like you did with an Empire, right? So when we finally see her perform in The Last Jedi, then you're like, okay, why did they keep this from us? And it kind of, again, played out like Jedi, or like Jedi and Boba Fett and Jedi, where we just get barely enough of her and then we don't ever see her again. So I kind of chalk her up to that. I think that's what they tried to do. Maybe they did. Maybe they didn't have really an intent for her. But now that we, learned Boba Fett's backstory with the prequels, but now the only way to know her backstory is to read this novel, which a lot of people aren't going to do. Unfortunately, it's not going to change a lot of people's perception of Phasma, right? If that's all they have is the movies. Mm-hmm. So I do think that if you want to truly understand this character, you have to read this book. But if you feel very happy with what you got at the movies, then you don't need it. Is that fair to say, you think?
Oh, I think that's more than fair. And I never even drew the connection between her and Boba Fett, probably because, like, with Boba Fett, even though we got a bit of his backstory in the prequels and you see him throughout the Clone Wars, people were still screaming for a Boba Fett show. They were just screaming for it for years and years, decades even, and finally we got it. But I think you're right. If she is supposed to be a parallel to Boba Fett, then they definitely missed the mark on the first movie.
Yeah, agreed.
Because honestly, I completely forgot her name after the first movie. I was just like, oh yeah, and that chrome stone stormtrooper.
Yeah, well, a part of you thought, well, she had to have died when Starkiller Base got destroyed, right? Because I never thought we'd ever see her again.
Yeah, I was like, oh, but the reason why I'm like, she has to be significant is because I remembered the actress who played her.
Correct. Yes.
And I'm like, she's well known, so why did they put maybe it's like they did with Daniel Craig in the Stormtrooper. Maybe that's it. Like, I don't know. But no, I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So there's a lot of story in here that lends itself to the understanding of, certain things from the sequel trilogy. Like I said, the stormtroopers and, where Armitage Hux kind of gets his attitude from, and learning. There's not really a relevance, I feel like, with Parnosis because it's an unknown region. There's no government there. Like the Republic is not there. The New Republic at this point. So there's, but you know, the understanding what's on that planet and the culture is pretty cool. And then, you know, then we have, like you brought up, we have Cardinal, which Cardinal does show up again, I think, in another story. Let me double check that I brought him up here.
Is he in Black Spire?
He is in Black Spire. You're right. So Vi, you know, gets to know Cardinal through this interrogation, and then the character of Cardinal does show up in the book Black Spire. So that was pretty cool. I remember reading that thinking, oh, okay, great. There's that character again. So they have kind of expanded this character, introduced a new one. And honestly, I thought that's another character that's, you know, got a good story there going on too. I think, you know, what he's going through in this book and what he struggles with, again, is a lot. It kind of resemble I was about to say kind of resembles Finn, but not so much. You know, Finn kind of, yeah, not really. I was thinking of another stormtrooper that kind of had different viewpoints, but you know, Cardinal's very, you know, loyal to the First Order, and you know, it's very similar. I will say it's very similar to some of those characters that we've read about and heard about now about the Empire, where they had this viewpoint of the Empire being this very good government and entity and helping and all this stuff, and not really being able to see what their true intentions are. And you know, Cardinal's kind of in that boat too, where he's very loyal to the First Order, and all the things that Vi's trying to tell him about it, he's just not buying it. And there's a lot of growth there with him, you know, through this interrogation, I feel like. So in the end, that dynamic was, even though it started slow, that dynamic got better towards the end, and obviously it wraps up pretty nicely.
Oh, definitely. Completely agree.
So, what else? Anything else relevant to this? How relevant, you know, we kind of hit on it, but I mean, how relevant does this for you change how you perceive the sequel trilogy?
I mean, it doesn't necessarily change how I perceive the sequel trilogy. I mean, one aspect does, but I can't say it because it's a spoiler.
Okay. I think I know what you're talking about too.
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. It makes me go, how the heck does that fit into everything?
Mm-hmm.
I want to know more about that. And then we don't know more about it. So I think that greatly impacts
the
sequels. But everything else objectively doesn't really have an impact on anything.
Yeah.
Regarding the Skywalker saga.
Yeah, and I wish they had the foresight to put Vi, you know, into the movies.
Just a little cameo would be nice.
Yeah, that would have been nice. And I'm assuming she's alive during the Rise of Skywalker. I mean, it would have been nice to see her in the background there, or at the base there, you know, because she is such a prominent character that they put her in live action at Galaxy's Edge walking around. So, you know, I wish they would have done that. So, because I do like her, especially in Black Spire. I like her a lot.
I completely agree with you, because I remember we actually went to opening weekend at Galaxy's Edge in Disney World.
Mm-hmm.
And she was walking around and I had no idea who she was. I'm like, she's clearly an important character.
I know.
But I have no idea who she is. And like, I talked to you about it. I'm like, who is this girl? And you're like, oh, that's Vi. Like,
that's right.
Great. Who is that?
I know. It's almost like Dr. Aphra. Like if Dr. Aphra was walking around, people would be like, who is that? And you'd have to read the comics and know who Dr. Aphra is. So, yeah, I think Vi, hopefully she shows up somehow in something. I don't know what it would be, but
I don't know at this point, but
yeah, I don't know at this point either.
Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah. So, okay. Overall rating on this thing, what do you think?
I'm gonna have to give it a 4.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the beginning was a little slow in the sense of it's like, wait, I thought this was about Phasma, but as soon as we got to Phasma, I couldn't put it down. It was just so good.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I think a 4 on my list as well, because it is, for me, I don't mind learning about mysterious characters. You know, like, it doesn't take the mystery away out for me to know a backstory. In fact, it just, to me, it lends itself more to understanding why they're doing what they're doing. You know, like that whole argument of Vader. It's like some people didn't want to ever know Vader's backstory. Well, why not? Because
why not?
He is so tormented, you know, and so evil. You got to, why is he like this? You got to find out why.
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil.
Yeah, exactly. And why does he have that viewpoint, right? I mean, that's very relevant. And Phasma's the same way. I think, you know, we don't get enough of her in the movies to justify her importance, I feel like, in the sequel trilogy. But knowing her backstory and where she came from and how she became who she is, it's like, okay, well, she's a bad person under that armor, and it's not her fault that they didn't portray that enough in the movies, you know, but she has an incredible story. So definitely worth picking up if you want to know more about Phasma, I feel like.
Absolutely. Or if you just want a great read.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it definitely feels like a Star Wars book, and there's so many elements to the planet, like I said, the planet and the other people that are on there and the situations they get into and things like that. It's a great adventure story of her character.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, that'll do it. Thank you for, of course, this is for our patrons, so thank you for being a patron and contributing to Inside the Force and supporting us. We really, really do appreciate it. For more Inside the Force, go to our YouTube channel or on all your podcast feeds. But if you are a patron, you are getting some exclusive stuff from us like this video. So continuing to check the feed. Thank you, Hannah, as always.
Thank you, as always.
Yes, fantastic insight. Come back. We'll be doing more. We've got more novels we're covering, more comics we're covering. We're almost finishing the Star Wars series, which has been a long series.
It's been long.
It's been long, and then we're going to be diving into more comics and all that stuff here soon. So keep coming back, and we will see you next time. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. May the Force be with you.